Welcome to Ethics Matter. I'm Stephanie Tsai, and our guest today is Danah Boyd, a principal researcher at Microsoft Research and the founder and president of Data and Society, a research institute focused on understanding the role of data-driven technology in our society, technologies used by companies like Facebook and Google, and soon perhaps your employer, your government, perhaps your police department. She has degrees in computer science as well as a PhD in information and has written 2 books on the intersection of society, culture, and internet technologies. Danah is here to help us understand the limitations and the risks of big data, algorithms, and machine learning. And hopefully, Danah, we will be able to define some of these terms as we get into the conversation. Welcome to the Carnegie Council. Are we in the midst of a technological upheaval that is drastically changing society? Is that why you started your research center?
For me, it's not so much that we're in the midst of something that's changing, it's more that there's a moment where we're suddenly paying attention to a set of issues that have actually been going on for a very long time. So when you step back, you actually can see patterns over a longer period, but we're in a moment where everybody's paying attention. It's a phenomenon, people want to understand it. And there's nothing like that moment of phenomena for people to get obsessed with hype, imagine all of the great things it will do, and also simultaneously be terrified. And so a lot of what I'm interested in with data and society is to make certain we can ground it and sort of step back and say, okay, what is real? What are the ramifications in light of a whole set of other social, dynamics? And really try to make certain that we're more informed in our approach to a lot of these technologies.
A phrase that I hear thrown around a lot in the last few years is big data. And I'm sure that that is something your research center looks into. How big has big data gotten? And how did we get here?
Right. So I joke that big data often has nothing to do with bigness and rarely has anything to do with data. But it's in many ways the mythology that if we just collect more information about more people, that we can do magical things, that we can solve problems that have been historically intractable. And I think that's actually where we get ourselves into trouble. There's a lot of techniques and technologies that are actually doing data analytics across large swaths of data. And some of the most sophisticated are having nothing to do with people. Astronomy data, for example, pretty amazing. What we're seeing in terms of genetic analysis, unbelievable. But a lot of what we talk about when we talk about big data is the idea that companies like Facebook have tremendous information about you and your practices and what you're doing. And so they're trying to understand patterns. So a lot of what it becomes synonymous with is the idea of prediction. The idea that we could just take this data and predict something about you. And the question is, should we be doing those predictions? Who's manipulating that data, and what are the ramifications there? So, and I would say the other thing about big data is it's become also collectively synonymous with artificial intelligence, which is our other term.
Okay, we are going to get into artificial intelligence, but can you give us a broad definition of what you mean by big data? You brought up some of the ways data is collected, but when we talk about big data, what are we actually referring to?
So, from my perspective, big data is actually about a phenomenon. It's not actually about something that is a collection of large swaths of data.
Okay.
So it's about a set of business practices, a set of technologies, and a set of beliefs of what we can do with a huge amount of information about people and their practices.
Okay, and part of that is algorithms and how big data is used by algorithms to make decisions.
So that's been a lot of the interesting transition, right? Which is one, that phenomenon has been, what do we do with all of the analytics or the information we have? How do we analyze it? Often we get into conversations then about machine learning. So machine learning is usually the next translation. So that moment we can take all of this and not just do run-of-the-mill business analytics or statistical processing, but say, how do we actually analyze this data for prediction? A lot of machine learning algorithms are to cluster or to predict, to make specific decision-making processes available. And that actually is one of the reasons why you have to connect it to artificial intelligence, because big data became almost synonymous with Big Brother, with big surveillance, and so that became a term that has been deprecated by a lot of different communities and been replaced with artificial intelligence, where we've actually meant many of the same things. Large amounts of data analytics, the ability to do sophisticated machine learning and more advances in machine learning.
The way I think most of us typically confront and use these technologies is every time we go on Google or Facebook. What are other ways and other examples of how big data and machine learning and algorithms are impacting our lives today?
So within the core technology universe, think anytime you are given a recommendation, what movie should you watch? What things should you purchase next? What news articles should you read next? Those are all part of this ecosystem. But of course, it goes beyond the world of information technologies. It's also starting to shape things like medicine, right? How do we start to understand, your cancer? We also see this in environments like criminal justice, which is where it can actually be a much more problematic environment.
Let's stop there. With criminal justice, that is an area in which algorithms are being applied that some say is ethically concerning. So let's parse that out a little bit more. What types of risks are there to using machine learning in criminal justice?
The biggest challenge with criminal justice is that the public does not actually agree on the role of criminal justice. Is criminal justice intended to punish somebody? Is it intended to prevent them from committing future crimes? Is it intended to rehabilitate? What is our actual role of that? Now, that's part one, because it actually starts to shape the kinds of data that we collect. We collect different data depending on what we view the role of criminal justice to be. Next, we have a whole set of biases in how we've actually deployed criminal justice practices, how we've engaged with policing. Our policing structures have long been biased along, axes like race, gender, income level, communities.
So in theory, wouldn't making machines more part of the process make it more neutral, make it less biased?
Depends on what data it's using. And the challenge here is that what most of those systems are designed to do is to say, let me learn based on what I've known in the past to make decisions about what should happen in the future.
Okay, give me an example of that.
So, for example, when you're trying to do a predictive policing algorithm, you're trying to say, where have there been criminal activities in the past? So let me send then law enforcement to those sites where there's a higher likelihood of criminal behavior. Well, where has there been activity in the past? It's the places where police have chosen to spend time in. It's the people that they've chosen to arrest.
And that might be based on their personal biases.
Or a whole set of other values. For example, if you look at drug arrests, we actually know that the drug data in the United States is that whites are far more likely to consume and to sell drugs. Yet when we look at the arrest records in the United States, we overwhelmingly arrest blacks for both consumption and sales of drugs. And so as a result, then you're trying to predict who is most likely to engage in criminal activity around drugs. Your algorithms are going to say, oh, well, actually it seems to be mostly something that occurs with Black and African American individuals. And it's like, that's not true. That's based on flawed data. And so that's the problem in criminal justice. It's like, could we design a system to be more responsible? Certainly, but it all depends on the data. And the problem with machine learning algorithms or big data or artificial intelligence is when the data is flawed, we are going to not only pipe that flawed bias through the system, but we're going to amplify it. And so the result is that we increase the likelihood that we are reproducing more and more biases in our data.
How do companies like Facebook and Google use machine learning and algorithms, for example, to, in their case, optimize their bottom line? And how do they account for values such as democracy and privacy and free speech?
Right. So take something like a search engine. That's probably the easiest example to make sense of. There is no, when you put in a search term, right, like cats, what you might want to get out of it is the Broadway show. What I might want to get out of it is pictures of soft, fuzzy things, right? And part of it is that the system is trying to figure out, it's trying to make a good prediction of what, based on knowing about you, you actually meant by that very vague term. And the result is that the data is used to start personalizing the search queries. So the result is that you search for cats, you get the Broadway show because we all know you love Broadway. I, who have clearly watched way too many cat videos, I'm getting lots of fuzzy animals, and that feels all nice and fine. But what happens when I decide to figure out about, say, a political candidate? I want to search for the current, mayoral candidates in my home city. So what is the information that I should receive? I have a clear history of watching a particular segment of news. So let's say I regularly watch Fox News. Should I receive the Fox News link to the information about that candidate as the first thing? Or should I receive, for example, a New York Times response to it? And the challenge with those is those are two different social views on a political candidate. What Google is trying to do for its bottom line is to try to give you the information it believes you want the most. That's because it makes certain that you come back and are a return customer. It fulfills your goals. You're more likely to spend time in its services and therefore click on its advertisements, et cetera, et cetera.
This goes into that whole idea of confirmation bias, that what people want in general is for their views to be confirmed.
And what they want is to feel like they have control over the information that they're receiving. So the result is that combination of their perception that they have control with their perception that they're getting what they want is what makes them commit to that particular technology. And so this is the funny thing, is that people actually want to be given the information that confirms their worldview. They want the things that actually make them feel comfortable. It's hard work to deal with things that are contradictory. It's hard work to tease out information. And so people generally want things that are much more simple. So what's challenging for me is that as a society, we're so obsessed with us individually, our choices, our opportunities, what will let us feel good, that we're not able to think holistically about what is healthy for society. And that is a challenge at every level. We live in an individualistic society, and even though we can use technology to connect with people, we use it to magnify our relationships of people that we like, that we're interested in, that share our values.
There's the magnification part, and I also want to talk about the manipulation part. In this past election, American intelligence believes that there was intervention by a foreign power, specifically by Russia. And, there's a sense that there was a manipulation of social media and other sort of search platforms. The stakes are high in all the ways you describe them, but even to the point of on a geopolitical scale,
Absolutely.
That's how high the stakes are. Was that a wake-up call?
I think it's become a wake-up call for many. I think that it's got a long history. So let's just take the core data architecture that's built into our Constitution, the census. The census is what allows us every 10 years to count the population in the United States and then to make decisions how we reapportion the population or how we distribute a lot of resources. Since 1790, when we started actually doing this, people have manipulated that data source. They've manipulated it for all sorts of political gains. They've manipulated the outputs of it for all sorts of gerrymandering. They've tried to mess with it. Voting records, no different. We have a long history of trying to mess with voter registration. And that manipulation is not just by external actors. That's also manipulation within our own state. Nowhere is that clearer than the history of Jim Crow and what we've done around a huge amount of racism in the US. So here we are walking into a 2016 election with a long history of every data type being messed with for economic gain, for political ideology, for fun and games, for foreign adversarial attacks. Of course people tried to mess with this election. They always have. The question is, what was different about this one and how did it play out?
Okay, so what was different?
And so for me, what I saw again was that we started to see technologies be part of the equation. And they started being part of the equation in multiple fronts. So on one hand, there was the moment of using technology to manipulate the media. And that perhaps is the one that is often most challenging, because
how is the media manipulated?
Any journalist knows that you get phone calls trying to get you to sell their product effectively or to tell their story or their opinion from the White House or whatever variation of it. So journalists have long dealt with very powerful actors trying to manipulate them directly. What they are less familiar with is a world of things that look organic, designed to manipulate them. So let's talk about some concrete examples. When you have decentralized populations who are running campaigns to get content onto Twitter, to make it look natural, to produce sock puppets, to produce basically fake accounts on Twitter, to then write out to you as a journalist and be like, hey, you know, what's going on with this Pizzagate thing? And all of a sudden, you as a journalist are like, what is happening? There's, you know, somebody in the public has given me a tip. I need to pay attention. Except it wasn't just somebody in the public. It's somebody who's intending to get a message to you, very much designed to send you down a particular track. And that's where we started to see massive coordinated efforts. These efforts had been happening for social media marketing for the better part of a decade. But we started to see it really turn political. The interesting thing is the political coordination of it, at least that I got to witness, was first not foreign actors. It was people who were messing with systems. So, you know, I watched this pattern with young people for the better part of 10 years.
So it was trolls and people that were just having fun?
It started out that way. Because, I mean, like when I watched it, you know, years ago, there was nothing funnier than to get Oprah Winfrey to say inappropriate things on TV. Right? It was great. So I watched teenagers build these skills in order to get Oprah to say something ludicrous. And they learned how to do this. And that's a skill that, you know, is sort of interesting when you start to think about how it can be mobilized. And then we have a situation, you know, about 4 or 5 years ago, where we have a lot of very misogynistic practices happening through technology. New techniques, things like doxing, the idea of finding somebody's full information so that you can actually cause them harm. So an example of causing them harm would be something like swatting, which is the idea that I would call up 911 and say that there's a bomb in your house. And the result is that the police would send out a SWAT team, swatting, to your house, cordoned off looking for the bomb. But it was a hoax. It was not actually real. So these were things that were done to start attacking a group of women in a whole set of phenomena known as Gamergate. So these were moments where these same networks started to take a more problematic turn. They started actually doing things that had a lot more harm to people. These are the cornerstones of a lot of groups who began then trying to mess with journalists for the election. At the beginning, it was pure spectacle. It was hysterical to watch during the Republican primaries this, you know, weird candidate who, you know, for all intents and purposes was a reality TV show star, be such a fun game to mess with. Could you get the journalists to obsess over him?
It feels scary to hear you talk about this because it feels like we have surrendered our control entirely to these anonymous people that have figured out how to utilize these technologies to manipulate societies, governments, democracy, voters, journalists, every aspect of society that we could talk about that is dependent now on social media and online technologies.
But that's been true of every technology throughout history.
Has it?
Yeah, that was the story of film. Look at the story of film and propaganda and the anxieties in the 1930s that we had, well, because we thought it was a fascist media. Right? So we've had these turns and we've had these moments where we had wake-up calls. What we're in the middle of right now is a serious wake-up call. And the question is what we're going to build in response to it. Also, are we going to be able to address some of the root problems that are actually made visible during these moments? Root problems of, you know, serious racism. That is not new in this country.
Right.
But for so many people, the Obama, you know, years meant, oh, we're past that. It's like, no, we're not even close to being past that. Or these moments where we actually have to deal with destabilized identities. We have large number of people in this country, especially young people, who don't feel secure in who they are or where they're going. They are so ripe for radicalization. And that is extremely scary. And we, again, have seen this throughout history. So how do we get ahead of that and say, whoa, it's not just about who is engaged currently in horrible, nefarious, racist acts, but also who has the potential to be where we have a moment where we could actually turn them. And I think that's where we should be starting to be responsible about our actions. when we think about the morality of these technologies, it's not just about thinking about the technologies, but the people as they're interfacing with them.
I agree that we can point to different technologies throughout time, and even dating back to the printing press, as being sort of periods. I think you've called it moral panic in your writings. But that brings me to artificial intelligence and the new dimension and the new risks and worries that we're hearing about with AI. First of all, give me sort of your sixth grader definition of AI, and then let's talk about how that maybe changes the game a little bit.
Right. I think that what AI currently means is not the technical definition. It's actually about a set of business and social processes where we're going to take large quantities of information and we're going to use it to train a decision-making algorithm to then produce results that we then go and use in different ways.
Okay. And eventually that machine will be trained to sort of, in some ways, think on its own, make decisions based on huge amounts of data, machine learning. AI is sort of that next level.
It's not think on their own in the way that we as humans think about thinking. Mm-hmm. It's about going beyond procedural decision making to basically training an algorithm to design better algorithms for the broader system. But the values are still the whole way through. So it's not the idea that the machines will suddenly wake up and start thinking. That's not the case. It's more that they will no longer just do exactly what they're told. They'll be designed to iterate themselves.
But doesn't that surrender in and of itself, that definition, doesn't that surrender part of a human being's ability to control that machine?
So part of why we have always designed machines is to scale up our capacities, right? I can count pretty high, but a machine's going to be able to count a lot higher and a lot faster, right? I can certainly divide perfectly fine, but a machine is going to be able to divide a lot faster. Those are those moments of scale. And so what you want is for technologies to be designed in ways that actually allow us to do things for which we simply don't have the capacity. So think about something, in a medical realm, detection of cancer. We have to use tools to detect cancer. We have used a ton of tools throughout the history of medicine. We have the ability to use more and more sophisticated tools based on data, artificial intelligence systems, to be able to detect cancer faster. And over the next 10 years, we're going to see phenomenal advancements at this. And so those are the moments where I get very excited because that is leveling up, a capacity that we don't have. It's also about pattern matching. So, in other contexts. So I'll give one. I'm on the board of Crisis Text Line, which is this amazing service where we counsel young people and adults, but primarily young people, through text messaging with trained counselors. And we use a lot of technologies to augment the capabilities of those counselors. So a counselor may have had 100 sessions, and they have experienced those sessions. They use their past knowledge to decide then how to interact with whoever's coming in their text message stream. But what does it mean to then use technology for that counselor to learn from the best practices of thousands of counselors? And for the technology to sit in relationship to her and say, guess what, I've seen this pattern before. Maybe you want to ask if this is a disordered eating issue.
Right.
And that actually is that augmentation.
Well, that's terrific, and obviously there are a lot of positive uses of AI. Let's talk about, in the context of our previous conversations, again, that idea that every time there is a new technology, society must reckon with how it expresses its values, and whether you feel like artificial intelligence presents yet another challenge to what we've already been talking about here in the deployment of algorithms and machine learning.
I think it presents a challenge for the same reasons that I'm talking about it in these positive dimensions. Because just because it can scale positive doesn't mean it will only scale positive. It will also scale negative, right? And how do we grapple with that? And that's where, again, I like history because it's a grounding force. Watching the history of scientists around nuclear energy is a really good reminder of this. They saw the potential for much more environmentally friendly, ability to achieve energy at a significant level. Of course, we also know where that technology got deployed in much more horrifying ways.
Are you optimistic that there can be a regime that can grapple with these issues and hold the different players to account in ways that will that we saw with nuclear technology? Are you optimistic about that?
I think yes and no. And I say that because I think we've done a decent enough job on nuclear, but we're still contending with it massively. Mm-hmm. We've done a lousy job on climate. We have the data on that. Mm-hmm. And we can't get our political processes together to actually do anything about it. So I can see both possibilities. And I think that there's a lot of really good interventions or efforts being made. I think there's a lot of attempts to build out tools to understand what's going on with the system. The question for me is, it's not actually about the technology or about the systems. It's about us as agented actors in a society, and what will it take for us to mobilize to do the hard political work. And it's not clear to me, right? I can see us getting there, but I would have thought we would be a lot further on climate today than we are. So that's the challenge.
Danah Boyd, thank you so much. Fascinating insights.
Thank you.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.